Hey readers, welcome back to Reading Realm. Today's review is going to be a little bit shorter because the book is a little bit shorter than usual. This is Stickeen by John Muir. This is one of the non-fiction books that I am reviewing this year, and it is an autobiography, but sort of more about the dog than about the actual guy who's recounting his story. So I feel like this is kind of a well-known book if you're in environmental science or environmental history at all, especially in the US. I study environmental science, and we talk about John Muir so much in that major. We read excerpts from this in one of my classes, actually, and I read this as a child, I think, or had it read to me, but I haven't read the entire thing until recently. And it's really interesting. I don't usually go for autobiography or nonfiction if I'm just choosing something to read casually. But this story is really, really cool because without getting too much away, it's basically a story about this dog that accompanied John Muir and the group that he was with when they were exploring glacier in Alaska. And this specific story covers specifically a particular really memorable day that happened, which John Muir has said in this book, and it says on the back, he described it the most memorable day of all my wild days, which, if you know about everything John Muir did, that's kind of impressive that is specifically the most memorable day. But this is Stickeen, and this picture is actually in the book as well, because there are a few pictures throughout, and the cover picture is one of them, after a really specific thing happens that I'm not going to say, because it is kind of one of the most dramatic parts, because since this is just an autobiography, it's not the most plot twisty that much, because it's real life. But the pictures are really good at captivating the scale of things. It might be a little bit hard to see, but these are people in a kayak, and then the scale of the cliffs here. But it's a really cool book, and it's also interesting because at the back, it has an afterword that's sort of like backstory to the actual words that he wrote, which is what the main story is. And then there's also a timeline of his life, so that if you are interested in more stuff about John Muir, you can kind of see the major events in his life, some of which I have studied in depth in school, but I think it's a really interesting book. One of the most interesting things that I found was at the end of the book, he mentions what happened to Stickeen afterward, or rather the lack of knowledge about what happened to Stickeen, and that is wild. That's not what I was expecting to just casually be thrown in at the end. So that was very strange. But overall, I think it's a really, really interesting book. I think his visuals that he describes are very well done as well. He is like a pioneer in American conservation, and also like appreciating nature, especially he did a lot of stuff with Yosemite, so I feel like that's what a lot of people will probably know him for, if they don't delve really deep into John Muir or Muir Woods. That's another place that's actually named after him. But his way of describing things is so fascinating. And his sort of approach to things as well, because he talks through a couple of situations where he had to make a decision, and the way that he made them was really interesting. Like, at one point, he was like, I could have breakfast, or I could also run off into this storm and go exploring. And he picked run off into the storm and go exploring, and then Stickeen followed him, and that's basically the day that this is all about. So, it's very, very cool, very interesting. Here's a picture of Stickeen getting lifted out of the water onto a boat. But I think it's really, really interesting because there are certain moments where I think the mentality of how he thinks about this dog is interesting. And I don't remember the exact quote, but there's something where he talks about how at first he thought of, like, Stickeen and dogs in general as sort of like the lesser of God's creations compared to humans, and then by the end he's talking to Stickeen as if he's a small child, like a human child. And I will also say, in terms of language, this, I don't actually know when the original, so the text is reprinted from a 1909 version, so this is old. But there are some things about the language used that I think are not politically correct to use currently. Like, he refers to indigenous people or Native Americans as Indians, because at that time that was still what they were called. And so that was something that just stood out to me, because also in my major we talk a lot about respecting what indigenous people know about the environment and how important it is to learn from them and also sort of do what we can to try and help them and their cultures and practices and knowledge still be preserved even after what colonization has done to a lot of indigenous populations. So it's something that we're all very aware of. So it just kind of stood out to me that I don't think that's the correct term to refer to indigenous people now, but at the time it was written, I think people thought about that a lot less. So, because this is talking about something that happened in 1880. So it's definitely not very modern. But I think, overall, it is a really, really cool story, and the fact that it's real is also wild, because it's just fascinating what he did and also what this dog did, and it's fun because knowing Cosmos, when I was reading it, I could sort of picture him in some of the situations, or at least some of his behaviors in some of the situations that were being described. He's never been in quite that situation, but yeah, I think it's a good book. I think it's also technically accessible to all ages. On the back it says young adult, but I think I read this as a kid. I think you might understand more or get more out of it as a slightly older person, because I don't remember it that much from when I was a kid. But reading it now was very cool. And also, it's just, compared to some other environmental literature that I've read that reads much more like an essay, this one reads sort of more like a narrative, so it's really fun to read compared to some of the stuff that's a little more tedious to read. And it's a pretty short book. It's only this thick. It's like 70 something pages, and then the afterward and the timeline of his life. So, Cosmos is going to yell out the window. But, yeah, it's a very, very cool book, and I highly recommend it for anyone who is interested. And it's also just very fascinating. Like I said, the thing that's revealed at the end about Stickeen left me with so many questions, and I'll never have an answer to them, and yeah, I have no idea. I want to know, though, because it's such a cliffhanger. But that is Stickeen. I think it is definitely a very, very cool experience that he got to have. Both of them got to have, even if it was slightly traumatic for both of them, in a certain way as well. So, I think I've said enough about it. It is a short book, again, so there's not a ton to say about the actual plot without giving away too much. It's really good. I enjoyed it. But let me know what you're reading and how your reading lists are going for the year so far. Or if you've read this, let me know what you think. Again, try to avoid as many spoilers as you can in the comments. But if you haven't yet, please subscribe and keep reading. Bye!